Welcome back to Transformation Decoded. We are delighted to be here with you again today. And for those of you who may be visiting us for the first time, I'd like to introduce us as the three amigos, the triad, the trinity of Transformation Decoded. And I'll have each one of us tell you a little bit about ourselves in a moment. But the backstory of why we are here talking to you today in your homes while we're social distancing and self-isolation is that we are life and business mastermind partners who came together about 2 years ago and created an extraordinary bond, some very innovative processes that were relevant to who we are today. And we have amazing results. We think this is so exceptional to come together as a group. We wanted to share our secrets and our formulas with other women around the world. We've been figuring out as we go along how to decode and demystify transformation and help each other get a crystal vision for the best self that we want to be in the future. My name is Isabel Banerjee. I'm one of the founders of Transformation Decoded, and I am also the Chief Encore Officer of the Encore Catalyst. Lee, would you introduce yourself?
Happy to. Hi, I'm Lee Woodward, and I also am a founder of Transformation Decoded and the owner of Woman in Disguise, a different kind of beauty company.
And Jackie.
Hi, thanks so much, Isabel and Lee. I'm Jackie Ulmer, also a partner, obviously, in Transformation Decoded, and I am the CEO of Fun and Abundance at StreetSmartWealth.com.
And as you can see, we have varied titles and interests, but we're spectacular at all of our roles, aren't we?
Yes.
Indeed.
So today, we're also here as three women with something in common because we have collaborated also in a book that was published recently. And the title of the book is Who Am I Now? Feminine Wisdom, Unmasked and Uncensored. And this is where, with the collaboration of 20 women in total, we've shared a lot of intimate, raw, real information about the journey through womanhood wonderland. They're not always the topics that first come up at a wine and cheese party. But given the motivation and the emotional circumstances, they are conversations that real women have. Today, it's my pleasure to moderate our conversation and talk about the chapter that Jackie wrote in this book called Comparanoia. Comparanoia. I'm not even sure that I knew that word 2 years ago. But when I first heard it, it resonated deeply with me in a lot of my own life circumstances as I continue to evolve and grow. Now, Jackie, we consider you as our resident expert on the topic of paranoia, and that's why you accepted writing the chapter in the book. I think to kick off today's conversation, I'd love it, and I'm sure that our listeners would too, if you would read the intro to the chapter to set us up for a conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Isabel, and thanks so much for the invitation to contribute to your fabulous book and be part of this conversation that, as you both know, has led us to many other conversations, and that's been a lot of fun. Okay, so I'm just going to read that and we'll go from there. So, Comparanoia. You may be a lot like me and likely a lot like other women our age who suffer from this new world condition called comparanoia. We try to conceal the deep inner struggles that define us, constrict us, and limit our potential. We battle with feelings of unworthiness, insecurity, and unwarranted comparison to others. At times, we allow ourselves to believe that we are less capable, less deserving, and simply not good enough. As women, we measure ourselves against the standards that outdated societies defined and said are the metrics of how good we should feel about ourselves. A quick browse of the headlines and titles on the magazine rack serve as a constant reminder of our self-approval rating based on the perfect bikini body, 10 moves that will drive him wild in bed, have a career or be a good mother, top cosmetic surgeries to stay looking your best. Should you apologize for going out in public without makeup? Comparanoia is rampant and spreading. We suffer with it, feverishly comparing ourselves to others and the false images and illusions we are exposed to in the media, self-isolated and shamed.
I'm just going to let that sink in for a minute. And I couldn't help but think too, the irony of the text that you just read, Jackie. Beautifully written. Thank you. And I love, because it was uncensored and unmasked, that the words isolation and self-censorship are more relevant today, even still, than when you wrote last year, because as we're speaking to you now, it's May the 12th, 2020. We are full on immersed in sheltering in place and social distancing and self-isolation. And how is that showing up for us every day when we're on multiple Zoom videos? Like this morning, I had a Rotary meeting at 7 a.m. and it was a race to get out and do my walk and get home and get my face on before I sat in front of that screen. So, oh wait. Lee, you have also contributed to the book, and I think about 2 episodes. We talked about your chapter entitled Unapologetically Beautiful, with or without a mask, right? Or the masks that we put on ourselves. I guess, Jackie, first, just to go back, so we know you're the expert on comparanoia because you've lived it. How did that show up for you in your life, and personally, how do you define comparanoia?
Well, comparanoia, and it's kind of funny, I would love to tell you that I came up with that term. I didn't. I don't remember where I first heard it, but it really resonated with me, especially in the world of social media today. I think that medium, if you will, has really accelerated and really put the spotlight on even more comparison and paranoia around who we are, how we look, and how we measure up in the world, because we constantly now not only have the potential to compare ourselves to the magazine racks and the celebrities on TV and at the movies and all of that. We get a daily stream of it in Instagram and Facebook, and anytime you're going through the newsfeed of social media, where you're looking at photoshopped and filtered and everybody's perfect life, and we have a tendency to measure our B-roll against everybody else's A-roll. Yeah. So it's kind of funny for me. I pretty much remember when those first feelings of comparing myself, not feeling good enough came along. It really didn't start with my family of origin. It really started more on the playgrounds in elementary school, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, mean girl bullying, honestly, that went on, where one day you were part of the inner circle and the next day, through reasons you couldn't figure out or I couldn't figure out, I was on the outside of the circle. Just a lot of that going over and over again, where I began to make up that story in my mind that there's something wrong with me. There's obviously something wrong with me. I'm somehow flawed. I don't measure up. I don't compare. I'm not as good as everyone else, because if I were, then this wouldn't be happening. So that's really when it started. And, you know, once you, the story that you make up in your mind, unless you work really hard to change that story, that's the story that we carry with us into adulthood and to the grave if we're not careful.
Do you think the proliferation of social media types these days make that more or less problematic?
Well, I think it can definitely make it more problematic if we're not careful. And I think especially for our daughters and younger generations coming up who've grown up with this in their face and will from here on out.
Yeah.
Whereas the three of us and others who may be watching, hopefully we've reached that point where we've become more self-accepting, more self-loving, had more compassion for ourselves, and believe in our own worthiness, or can find that good, or can at least rationalize and realize this isn't real life, what I'm seeing on social media necessarily. I live in real life. I interact with women in real life. I look the way I do, whether I'm sitting across the table from you in Starbucks, which hopefully I'll be able to do soon, or whether I'm on film or video, or if I'm on Instagram or something like that. So I think it has the tendency to make it much worse, and I think that's where we have the opportunity to change that message.
Well, and Brene Brown used a quote that I love that said, social media has created, an arena with a million cheap seats. And it's easy for people to fall into those cheap seats, meaning to do the bullying and the negative and, the hating online, because you're not connecting with somebody. It's a pretty, I guess, you're never going to have to face the consequences most of the time for whatever you type into that stream or the comments that you make. So I think it's worse, would be my guess. And in terms of, just because there's so much access to get really horrible comments from people that you may not even know. But I think that's a really powerful statement that she made.
It is, and it's the haters, the shamers, and the trolls, as I like to call them. They're out there, and it's super easy to hide behind your computer or the small screen on your phone and be a big shot and be one of those type people when you don't really have to face the music, and you can kind of be whoever you want to be if you choose to on social media.
Right. So bullies, shamers, haters, that's a category within this. And then the condition of comparanoia, which I think is an internally controlled one, I believe, but not, may also be accompanied by symptoms of imposter syndrome, particularly for women entrepreneurs, all right? So how did this manifest, or did it ever manifest for you, Lee, in your life, comparanoia?
I mean, in a lot of ways. And I would say, being a female executive, and sometime one of the few female executives sitting at a table, you are sitting there, and there are standards, and you're just trying to figure out how to be good enough. And so I think in that way, sometimes being the only woman in the room, you're just comparing yourself against the expectations of everyone else sitting around that table. And a lot of times knowing that I'm going to have to do something a little bit better to get the same attention, or sitting around that table and making a statement and having it go unrecognized, and then having a male counterpart make the same statement 5 minutes later, and oh yeah, that, and that leads to that. What do I need to do different? What do I need to do better? How do I do this? How do I do that? And I think it's one of the ways that hamster wheel of comparanoia would get started for me, which was so powerful when you start to have other women that sit around the table with you. I know there's this perception that somehow the cat fight exists. A vast majority of women that I've worked with support each other, back each other up. But it was really nice to be able to go to that room and say, did I imagine that? No, that's what happened. you said it, nobody heard it. And then someone, a guy said it and everybody heard it type thing. So we could kind of validate with each other, which was really a way to kind of get out of that comparanoia and just say, okay, so now how do we change that together in this work team or whatever? So it came up a lot that way.
Yeah, because I know your background, I know that you were operating a little differently than what society prescribed for the mom, pardon me, and your role in the household. And so that I was thinking when you were talking about comparanoia is bad enough, but when you're comparing yourself to how would the male corporate executive act be perceived, be judged, versus just saying how would I as a woman do that? That's got to create extra complexities, right?
Yeah, and you're right. Our family made the decision that my husband at the time stayed home with the kids, and I went to work. And there was definitely, he got a lot of kudos for that. What a great dad. And I was questioned as, wow, what kind of mother are you? Not by everyone, but enough of those looks where for him, it demonstrated a great commitment to his children. But by me choosing to go into the workforce and not play that role, kind of made me a little suspect. And so there was definitely that element of, okay, am I, being a good enough mom, and am I making time? Am I doing it all? Am I choosing my kids first and doing all that balancing act? Most definitely.
I just think it's a real piss off that in those circumstances we're giving the people in the cheap seats the microphone. Because, I mean, by what right do they get to decide what is more important for the success and well-being of the family and the individuals? And what are the circumstances that would lead to that being the right decision? And yet, dang it, and I'm saying that because I did it to myself many, many times. Why did I give those cheap seat free popcorn eating people power over my mind and my confidence? Right? How does that get seeded in us? And I can clearly think back of, kind of where the germination started for my weed of comparanoia that grew, is that why can't you be more like your brother, your cousin? Why can't you be, not so tall? Why can't you not be so smart? It was always that um, didn't measure up enough, so to try harder, to be cute, to be loved, to be approved of. I think that's the thing, is maybe it's most attached to approval for me. Um, and that continued on in my not only in school, because I was also the farm girl, as opposed to, and I have no idea what the story was in their head, and that's another Brene Brown conversation, right? What was the story I was telling myself about those other girls in school versus what they were actually thinking about me? But to then go on in my business life, my professional life, comparanoia with a capital C also meant college and lack of a degree for me, and how I compared myself to people who had letters after their names on their business cards. Even as silly as it was that I didn't go, but I signed their paychecks. Yeah, so anyway.
It's interesting because, and I think this certainly, and perhaps it's more of a cultural thing versus even gender. I think there is this idea that to be successful, we're supposed to work hard, and that somehow we're supposed to get better, right? I mean, that's that whole idea. And I think when that get better can get overtaken from external influences is when the comparanoia kind of fits in. But I think we all have this, hey, I want to get better in whatever area it is. And I think that can start that. And if we don't stay grounded with what that means to us, I think that's when it can really go haywire for men, women, across the board.
Yeah.
Is comparanoia also the lack of looking back at what how much we have grown and how much we've accomplished? It's like potato chips. You got to have one more success.
Well, I think so. And yeah, that probably leads a little bit to the imposter syndrome part of it. Certainly our generation and as women, and I don't want to take anything away from men, because I know that they experience their own share of comparanoia, and a lot of that, particularly around sports and, not being perceived as weak, and a lot of those type things, like, it's different things for women, different things for men, but certainly we're having the female discussion here. So for us, I think a lot of that imposter syndrome and a lot of those things come into play because, we're taught to be good and to be nice and, to not interrupt. Like, there's so many things, Lee, it was resonating with me when you were just even talking about that, like in the boardroom. It's kind of one of those things where a lot of times women don't interrupt and a man will, because that's just kind of how they do things. That's not a slight against them at all, but the way that they were brought up and their perception of doing that is just a lot different. So for women, we'll wait patiently until the conversation's done, whatever. And sometimes I wonder if that's why we aren't heard, if that's, why we're less or whatever, or we perceive that we're less in that situation. So yeah, there's just so many societal norms that we've come up with that we've allowed to plant those seeds. And again, coming back to, I can't remember what the age is, but after a certain point of time, we're all born thinking that we're brilliant and we can take on the world and do and be anything that we want to be, whether it's Superman, Superwoman, president, whatever it is. We believe that we can be an astronaut, we can do whatever when we're little. And somewhere, slowly that gets chipped away at. Some of it's parental messages. Oh, get your head out of the clouds. Oh, and I know for our generation, a lot of it was, you can be a teacher, you can be a secretary, you can be some of those things, not necessarily a doctor. I mean, that was certainly coming around and a lot of that was changing, but it takes a while for some of those things to shift. And I remember being with a high school friend a few years back at a reunion, and we were out walking, and she's quite accomplished in her own career. And she was talking about her daughter mentioning some things that she wanted to do and, the kind of house she wanted to have and whatever. And my friend said, well, I told her she better, she better plan on marrying a really rich man then. And I remember just myself being, like almost somebody had slapped me, thinking, why would you put that thought into her head? What would why would she need a man to have to be the one to provide that big house or whatever it is? It was just really interesting to me because we were certainly in our 40s at that point. And I was sorry that that message hadn't changed for her. I made a slight comment. I didn't want to go too far with it because I didn't want to, make her feel less or whatever, but it really surprised me.
Well, that's how much has there's two how much has society changed, and how much are we able to change how we respond to all of this? And that brings us back to transformation, right? It's transforming how we perceive the circumstances or the catalysts that affect our head and our confidence. So like what have you learned that are your defense mechanisms when you find yourself, when you're aware, or how first maybe do you become aware, oh, I'm falling in the comparanoia soup again, and then what do you do about it? Lee?
Well, I know for me,
Oh,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I know.
Uh,
I saw a flash in her eyes that
oh.
she said that there was like, oh yeah, I know.
Well, I think for me, what I try to do is I call them tells. Kind of like card game. It's my little things where I'm like, okay, when I get into real black and white, or I should have. When I start getting almost into a self-punishment mode, is when I know that I'm in some type of comparanoia, lack of confidence. I'm external influences are kind of driving me, and it's no longer feeling good for me. So I try to watch for those tells, and then for me, I try to just really discern what's really behind that. And we've been talking about that a lot, you ladies, and of reflection work. And that's often when I'll look at myself in the eyes in a mirror and just really have a conversation with myself about what's really going on. And I find when I make eye contact with myself in the mirror and kind of quiet everything else out, I can usually figure out what's up and then figure out what I'm going to do about it. And that can look really different depending on the situation.
Great tip. Thanks, Lee. Thank you. Jackie, what are your signs and solutions?
Well, and as you know, Lee and Isabel, I'm a huge fan of reflection work, and I've been doing a lot of that myself personally, and I've had some really, really big, important breakthroughs just in the last week or two. So I'm a huge fan of that. But ultimately, for me, a big part of it has come down to writing my own definition of success and what success means in all areas of my life. We have a tendency to think of success strictly from the business world and what we produce and the money we make and all of those type things, but success makes up a whole lot of different areas. So you guys have heard me talk about my five favorite F words, my 5 bucket areas, which are faith, family and friends, fun, fitness, and finance. I have written my own personal definition of success in all of those areas. My focus word for 2020 is accomplished. And so my goal at the end of the day is to look at each of those areas and say, how have I been successful and how am I feeling accomplished? And kind of like you, Lee, when I find myself getting into that muckety negative place, I realize that I'm not paying attention to my own definition of success. I'm falling victim of comparanoia, looking at what somebody else has accomplished without knowing any of the backstory, not knowing any really of the true story of what's going on, and making up that definition and then measuring myself against it. So just being really clear on what those definitions are for me, what my priorities are, and staying in my own lane, so to speak, has helped a lot.
I love that idea, Jackie, about writing your own success descriptions. Bravo. Okay, for everybody out there in video land, I hope you caught those 2 great tips, because you can take those and put them to work right away. And I know I'm going to, because I'm still working on me, even at 65 plus, figuring out at each level of my personal development and professional development and personal growth, uh, where are the trigger points? Where do I stumble? How do I become aware of them? This is like the conversation we had about feelings, right? Being aware and naming it, normalizing it, and then the strategy around it. So I know that we have a lot more to talk about on this topic, but for today, I'm going to just make a comment, and then I'm going to ask you each to give a little parting feminine wisdom to everybody. But the reason that we are doing this together right now is, of course, because of pandemic 2020. We're not able to be in the studio shooting this professionally, as was our intention for a live internet radio show with guests that would inspire and contribute wisdom to the transformation process. So instead, we're socially connecting and using the much used Zoom. So if you saw a little bit of fluctuation in quality and signal strength, it's because everybody else in the world is on Zoom at the same time as we are. But stay tuned. We're going to continue every week to bring you personal insights and wisdom and open this up for you. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page and tell us what are the things you want to talk about, because we're bold and we're going to talk about it and we're going to tell you the honest to gosh truth. So parting thoughts. Jackie, I'm going to leave you to the end because you're the Comparanoia catalyst here. No, I don't know what you are, but you're supreme at figuring it out. Lee.
I would say I've been thinking about this in a little bit different way. I think there's a lot of pain and grief going on right now, and I think it's easy to compare and feel like, wow, I don't have it as bad, or there's this going on. And I just, my words of wisdom would be that we all can claim our grief and we don't have to compare it to other people. If we're sad, we're sad. If we're afraid, we're afraid. We feel lost, we feel lost. And so not to compare and deny ourselves what we need to go through to heal and kind of move forward by comparing and thinking we don't have a right to have those feelings because it's not as bad as somebody else. So be kind to ourselves and to each other.
Bravo. Jackie.
Yeah, and Lee, I love that. That's such great advice. It's so true. And not just now, but always to, have that compassion and be willing to feel the feels, feel the feelings. I know that's something I struggled with for years. I'm a big fan of daily thought downloads and daily journaling. And I like to sit down, set my timer for 5 minutes and just start free flow writing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct, spelled correctly. It doesn't even need to make sense. It's just me getting all of that out. And then one thing that I've really started doing, if I'm having a particularly negative day, then I go through and I look through it and I shift the story. I write the reverse then of what I want to be feeling, what I want to be thinking, what I want to be experiencing. And a question I like to ask myself is, who am I in this muckety muck, and who am I in this new way of thinking, and which do I want to work more toward being? And that's helped me a lot. It really does help me reset the day if it gets off to a negative start. I do weigh in every morning. That's one of the first things I do is I kind of take my temperature and I come up with a word, a thought, a feeling, an emotion. And I start that with my thought download or my journal, and I kind of go from there.
Well, that was the best possible segue I could ask for, because one of the other topics on our agenda is to talk about who am I now? Who am I now in COVID-19 pandemic existence and experience? And who do I want to be coming out of this? So please stay tuned. Again, subscribe to our channel and our Facebook page and watch for announcements, because that's going to be a conversation that I think is a game changer in terms of our mindset and our attitude about the future and whatever the the new normal is going to be. Okay. So thank you, my mastermind, amazing friends. Thank you to everyone out there. And How to reach us and stay connected with us will follow at the end of this video. Goodbye for now.
Bye.
Bye.